closely. Not at the world, not at them, at you. Most people spend their lives looking outward, judging, reacting, blaming. But there comes a moment when the gaze turns inward and the real confrontation begins. What you see might disturb you, it might thrill you, but it will not lie to you, because the mirror never lies. And if you dare to look deep enough, you might notice something. Not a flaw in your character, not a mistake in your past, but a fracture, a split, a war within. You want to grow, but also stay comfortable. You want truth, but also peace. You want to evolve, but without losing your old self. That's the problem. The old self doesn't want to die. Friedrich Nietzsche saw this fracture more clearly than most. He called it by many names: the herd instinct, the morality of slaves, the comfort of weakness. But they all pointed to the same thing: our refusal to confront the full truth of who we are and what we might become. He wasn't asking you to become evil. He was asking you to become honest, because in a world that rewards conformity, obedience, and guilt, simply choosing to stand in your own truth, without apology, is an act of revolution. But let's be clear, Nietzsche didn't believe everyone could do it. In fact, he was certain most people wouldn't. Why? Because becoming whole requires you to delete the parts of yourself that are addicted to being small, and deletion hurts. It feels like loss, like betrayal, like death. But if you stay with it, if you resist the urge to run back to comfort, something happens. You begin to transform, not into a better version of the old you, but into someone entirely new, someone dangerous, someone free. So ask yourself, what part of you must die for the rest of you to truly live? Weakness doesn't always look like fear. Sometimes it looks like kindness, like humility, like morality. But Nietzsche saw through the mask. He saw that much of what society calls virtue is actually a subtle form of submission, a way for the powerless to pretend they've chosen their position, a way to turn envy into ethics. He called it slave morality. It says, if I can't be powerful, then power must be evil. If I can't win, then winning must be wrong. If I can't rise, then rising must be prideful. It's the morality of the bitter, the scared, the tamed, and it has infiltrated everything. You see it in the people who shame ambition, who mock confidence, who elevate suffering as the highest good. Nietzsche wasn't buying it. He believed that real virtue doesn't come from avoiding power. It comes from owning it and choosing what to do with it. But first, you have to admit you want it. And that's where most people flinch. Because wanting power, wanting greatness, wanting to rise, those desires expose you. They make you vulnerable to failure, judgment, and most terrifying of all, change. So instead, people wrap themselves in a morality that keeps them safe, small, predictable. They wear their chains like jewelry, and worst of all, they look down on those who dare to break free. But ask yourself, is your morality making you noble or just numb? Are you avoiding evil or avoiding your own potential? Because sometimes what we call goodness is just fear in disguise. You are not a fixed identity. You are not a final product. You are a process, a becoming. Nietzsche's most radical idea wasn't about power or destruction. It was about creation. He believed that the highest act a human being could perform was to become the author of their own soul, to reject imposed meanings, to rise beyond reward and punishment, to create a life that only you could live. He called this the will to power, but he didn't mean domination over others. He meant domination over the false self. Because if you look closely, you'll see you are being lived by ideas that are not yours. Ideas about success, ideas about love, ideas about who you should be and how much of yourself you're allowed to show. And they feel familiar, safe, but they are not you. So Nietzsche asked, what would it look like to break from that, to destroy the scaffolding that was built for you and build your own? It would be terrifying, liberating, real. But to do that, you must become someone new, not by adding more layers, but by shedding the ones that were never yours to begin with. This isn't self-improvement. This is self-creation. And creation always begins with destruction. So again, what must be destroyed in you so something true can emerge? There is a death no one talks about, not the death of the body, but the death of the lie, the false self you built to survive. But that now keeps you from truly living. Nietzsche understood this better than most. He wasn't asking you to become powerful in the way the world defines it. He was asking you to become whole. And wholeness, almost always, requires a death, not of your body, but of your illusions. You see, there's a version of you that was built entirely out of fear, the you that says the right things, the you that stays quiet to avoid judgment, the you that bends, adapts, conforms, just to be accepted. But here's the truth. That version of you is not real. It's a survival mechanism. A beautifully constructed ghost, and ghosts don't evolve. They haunt. So if you want to become, if you truly want to become, that ghost must die. But no one tells you what that actually feels like. No one tells you that the death of your false self feels like failure, like confusion, like loss, like you're falling apart, because you are. But that falling, it's sacred, because who you thought you were is dying, and who you actually are is trying desperately to be born. Nietzsche called this process self-overcoming, not a straight path, not a pretty one, but a necessary one, because nothing new can grow until the old is burned. So, what are you still holding on to? The wound that makes you feel significant, the story that makes you feel safe in your suffering, the identity that earns you love, but costs you your truth. Let it die. I know that sounds harsh. I know it sounds terrifying. But what's more terrifying? Letting it die, or living the rest of your life as someone you're not? That's the question Nietzsche forces us to face. Not gently, not kindly, but truthfully. And truth, when it hits, never arrives politely. It kicks the door down. It drags your ego into the light. It forces you to ask, what am I pretending not to know? Because deep down, you know what's keeping you stuck. You know what you're afraid to let go of. You know which parts of you are performative and which parts are real. And if you're honest, brutally honest, you'll realize that most of your life has been about protecting the illusion. But here's the paradox Nietzsche gave us. To truly live, you have to be willing to let the current version of you die. That death isn't theatrical. It's quiet, internal, invisible to the outside world. It's the moment you stop performing, stop explaining, stop justifying, and begin living from something unshakable, something raw, something real. But the price? Letting go of everything you thought you were. And yes, it hurts, because identity is addictive. Even false identity, especially false identity. We cling to who we were because it's familiar. But familiar is not the same as true. And truth demands that you become unrecognizable, not to others, but to the version of you that was built on fear. That's why transformation often feels like grief. You're mourning the self that kept you alive, but can't take you where you're going. And that grief is holy, because when you let the false self die, you make space for something else to rise, something untamed, something terrifying, something free. Nietzsche called it becoming the Übermensch, not a superior man, but a liberated one who has faced the abyss and chosen to build a ladder, one who has lost everything false and gained everything real, one who no longer needs to prove, perform, or please. Because when you've died and come back to life, not spiritually, but existentially, what can they take from you? What can they threaten you with when you've already surrendered the mask? This is the power Nietzsche spoke of, not the power to dominate others, but the power to no longer be dominated by your own shadows. So look into your own mirror now. What needs to die? What belief? What attachment? What mask? Breathe. Feel the fear. And still, let it go. Because something ancient is trying to be born through you. Something that doesn't need permission. Something that doesn't need applause. Something that doesn't flinch in front of the truth. Let the death happen. Not because you hate who you were, but because you love who you're becoming. There is a part of you you've been taught to fear. It doesn't smile. It doesn't follow rules. It doesn't want peace. This part of you is raw, unfiltered, primitive, and you've spent your life trying to silence it because it makes you uncomfortable, because it doesn't fit in, because it reminds you of everything you've tried to forget. Nietzsche had a word for it, the shadow, but not just the dark part of the psyche. The shadow to him was every instinct, every urge, every piece of potential that you had rejected, not because it was evil, but because it was inconvenient. The will to dominate, the capacity for rage, the craving for risk. You buried these parts of yourself to be loved, to be safe, to be good. But the shadow doesn't die, it waits. And while you pretend to be civilized, it speaks in whispers, in your jealousy, in your passive aggression, in the quiet resentment you carry like perfume. You think you've outgrown it. You haven't. You've just made it unconscious, and the unconscious rules everything. Nietzsche warned us, if you do not face your shadow, you will project it. You will see it in others. You will attack it in them. You will create enemies, so you never have to confront the enemy within. That's what most people do. They hate the confident because they've rejected their own power. They mock the assertive because they've silenced their own voice. They condemn the ambitious because they've buried their own hunger. But the shadow is not your enemy. It's your invitation to integrate, to reclaim, to become. Because the parts of you you've demonized are often the keys to your wholeness. You were not meant to be tame. You were meant to be conscious, to choose your power, not suppress it, to wield your rage, not deny it, to honor your hunger, not shame it. Nietzsche believed that true strength comes not from rejection, but from reconciliation. You don't heal by amputating your darkness. You heal by listening to it, by understanding it, by giving it a seat at the table, but not the steering wheel. And when you do, you become dangerous, not to others, but to every system that thrives on your submission, because a person who has integrated their shadow is not easily manipulated. They do not bow for approval. They do not shrink for belonging. They do not betray themselves for comfort. They are not perfect. They are whole. And wholeness is terrifying to those who benefit from your fragmentation. So here's the question Nietzsche leaves us with. What part of you have you silenced because it didn't make others comfortable? What truth have you hidden because it didn't match the narrative? And what would happen if you let that part speak, not to hurt anyone, not to destroy, but to finally, fully exist? Because until you face your shadow, you'll never trust your light. And the world, it doesn't need more well-behaved ghosts. It needs more fully alive humans, not polished, not perfect, but awake. And the only way to wake up is to go into the dark, find the part of you that still hides, and say, I see you, I hear you, let's come home, together. There comes a moment when you've burned every false part of yourself, and there is nothing left to destroy. No more masks, no more borrowed beliefs, no more identities that fit someone else's story, just you. And it's quieter than you expected, not triumphant, not glamorous, but still grounded, real. Nietzsche knew this moment. He didn't write from theory. He wrote from blood, from breakdown, from a mind that had stood on the edge of itself, and kept walking. He lost everything: his health, his reputation, his relationships. He descended into madness, and in that descent, he saw something most never will, that to become truly free, you must risk becoming unrecognizable, even to yourself. Because real freedom is not applause, it's solitude. It's knowing that your worth does not fluctuate with opinion. It's walking away from the systems, the people, even the dreams that no longer resonate. Not in anger, but in truth, because when you no longer need to be understood, you are finally ready to understand yourself. That's the final deletion, not of weakness, but of dependence, of needing to be seen a certain way, of needing to be anyone other than who you are. And Nietzsche paid that price. He died largely unknown, misunderstood, dismissed. But he died free, because the world never celebrated him. But he had already celebrated himself, not in ego, but in quiet knowing that he had lived his life unedited. And now, it's your turn. You don't need to become Nietzsche. You need to become the version of yourself that is no longer waiting for permission to exist. So stand in front of the mirror again and ask, am I ready to let the false die? Am I willing to delete the weakness that keeps me tame? Am I brave enough to lose the old story so something eternal can speak through me? If the answer is yes, then walk into the unknown, into the fire, into the silence where truth lives. And remember, this is not the end of your story. This is the end of pretending, and the beginning of becoming.